It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
To the program, State Representative Bob Ballinger is on the line. Bob, welcome back, sir.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Paul.
Absolutely. So the fiscal session is going on right now. I was just kind of covering what's going on in the, I guess, in the upcoming special session. But can I get your comment? Can we start by these letters? This letter from the Speaker of the House, Jeremy Gillum, putting this extra requirement of 2/3 before we can go to special session, and then kind of uprooting the concept of maybe just having the vote in the fiscal session and letting you guys legislate. I'm very critical of that, and I have been very critical of that because I think it's robbing you guys of power. Can I get you to respond to that? What was your reaction?
Oh, well, I'll tell you that, I don't like putting the additional requirements on and the additional hurdles. I didn't like that at all. However, I do understand the motivation behind it. The idea is to preserve the fiscal session for only budget bills. Mm-hmm. And so if we did open it up generally, then it makes it where we could really find ourselves. I mean, it's 2/3 vote to waive the rules. If you have enough people who have enough bills that they want to run, you can collect together that and get rid of the 2/3 vote. So it's sort of like the Revenue Stabilization Act, right? I mean, all that is a bill. So every year it could be changed. So, we could do it. But because of the fact that it is so important to Arkansas, we show a lot of fidelity to it.
Yeah.
Well, we almost have to put those same kind of protections on the fiscal session to avoid opening it up to having two full general sessions. So that is the motivation of the leadership. I didn't like it because, at that time I was carrying legislation that should have had no trouble getting the 2/3 vote, but going around and collecting the signatures is a lot bigger hurdle to do. And frankly, it does feel a little like you're putting a requirement in there that's really not in the Constitution. Well, there's no reason why leadership can't do that, but I didn't like it myself.
Well, you talked about the motivation of the leadership, but I mean, I guess I reject this concept of the spirit of the fiscal session. I mean, I know it's a fiscal session, but constitutionally, it's right there. If you want to hear a non-budgetary bill, they have the constitutional power to do this. And I guess in a state where the legislature doesn't have constitutional authority very often, it to me is I would say it's the opposite. I would say it's not in accordance with the spirit of the fiscal session because you're basically, trying to, move the goalposts, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, and I mean, at least the thing is that I'm sympathetic to that opinion. But what I would say is that I do myself, I would just as soon not have two general sessions. And I mean, we pass enough laws and enough bills in the state of Arkansas. We don't need to do it every year. But what I would say is, I think that the whole point of being able to open it up is either you have a situation that's a near emergency, so it's the type of thing that you would call special session for, or it's the type of thing that is just purely cleanup and has really broad support. And I think that if we would show fidelity to only doing it at those times, I think that's probably a better use of it. But at the same time, I mean, this is the thing is we've elected that group of leadership. Those are the people. They get to sort of decide how they implement the rules. But the nice thing is every 2 years that kind of stuff changes. So it'll be different in the future, I'm sure. And I'm right now in the middle of a speaker's race. So if somebody's really offended by it, they need to ask the next speaker candidate what they think.
Yeah. So back on the 2/3 requirement, the governor said in the press conference, he was asked, why 2/3 support for the pharmacy bill or whatever bill in order to get it on the call. And he said, because we don't want to go in with a 51 vote majority and then have somebody change their mind. And then I get questions from the media saying, how come you didn't get your agenda passed? Now, I'm paraphrasing, but I mean, it's very close to that. And so my question is, again, I mean, I want you guys to be able to legislate independent of this control. We're trying to manipulate and get like a pre-vote count where I want you guys to have the debate. I just quoted an article here in the Gazette where it says the governor and the legislative leaders have sought to ensure that a special session held at the end of the ongoing fiscal session will be compact by avoiding complicated issues that are likely to spawn lengthy debates. And I'm just like, I want the average legislator to have maximum amount of authority, and I don't feel like that's happening right now.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so you look at the Constitution of the United States. It says the Congress shall meet at least once a year. Well, the reason why they actually put that in the Constitution is because back then you had a bunch of farmers, you had bankers, you had people who actually would rather be back in Virginia and New York and North Carolina than be in D.C. And so they said, well, you have to come together at least once a year to work. What I'm afraid of is that Arkansas could become a little more like D.C. if we don't practice real restraints to make sure that we spend as little time as possible in Little Rock. So, well, I agree. I mean, I love the debate, right? I mean, that's me. I enjoy that. But I think that if we would save that for the general session, we only take care of things that are extremely important that we have to do immediately during a fiscal session or a special session, and then we get in, we get out, and that way people can go back to being regular citizens, taxpayers, and not feel like we're full-time elected officials. And so I mean, and this thing is I totally get. I mean, like I said, I'm sympathetic to your point of view. I'm a guy who likes the debate and thinks that the good legislation comes out of that. I just think that if it's something that is that complicated and something that is that needs that big public debate, well, maybe it's better to put it off and deal with it in 2019.
I guess, okay, my problem is, and I understand what you're saying, the more laws, the worse things get, generally speaking. That's totally true. Specifically, let's just take the pharmacy issue, though, okay? And the problem that I have with trying to get 2/3 support before your call a special session is actually it's putting you guys in a bad position, because I've talked to several pharmacists. I did this all last week, and Ron Caldwell's bill appears to be the favorite with the Pharmacy Association. And I got several of them on record, and they're saying, yeah, the governor doesn't support our bill. And so or Ron's bill. Now, he may now, I don't know. I know there's several competing ideas out there. But the point is, this is something that the legislature should decide. And I know he has the constitutional authority, and it's his responsibility to call the session. I get that. But when you add this arbitrary 2/3 support before we'll call a special session, that means if you don't get on board, potentially, with what the governor wants, well, then it's the legislator's fault for not supporting it. And instead, I mean, what I guess my point is the debate on this particular issue has risen to a level of an emergency, because you have pharmacists who are going to go out of business by the end of the year, according to the ones I've talked to. You see my point here is that I really don't think the process right now is being respected. We talk about, what's the spirit of the Constitution or the spirit of the fiscal session. I definitely know the spirit of a separate and equal branch of government like the legislature should be independent of the executive, and it doesn't feel like that. It feels like our legislative leaders are actually trying to do everything they can to make sure that the government or the governor is okay with their moves before they do them.
Yeah, if I have one chief objection to how things work down here in Little Rock is the fact that I don't feel like the legislative branch is independent enough. And so where that comes in is not, so the governor does have authority to decide how to make his call, when to make his call. That's something that we know is clearly vested in the governor's office. The objection here would be, why wouldn't we take it up in the fiscal? Regardless of that. That really is, the legislature leadership has decided that they also want to try to keep things really tight, and they don't want to deal with non-fiscal things during the fiscal session. And that's where my objection really is. It's not so much in the governor wanting to have his call limited, and because I don't want to be down here in a special for weeks on end debating things, especially when there's only probably like 10 or 15 legislators that really are engaged and involved in trying to put this together. You bring everybody else down here and pay their mileage per diem, all that stuff for them to sit here, and then finally for us to take a vote. I think it'd be much better to do it in the fiscal session. But even that, so I mean, I think the PBM bill is a great example of like it. I mean, sometimes the government being clogged and not working fast is actually an excellent thing. And I have a couple of pharmacists who I love, and they're being pinched and they're being hurt, and I want to see them find relief. But at the same time, when we move into this new area of regulation, we shouldn't do it flippantly. We should make sure that we're really careful. I mean, truly, what we're talking about is creating a new license in the state of Arkansas.
Yes.
I mean, I don't want that. You don't want that. I mean,
right.
It's kind of like one of the necessary evils that nobody wants to do. So when we do it, we got to make sure we do it extremely carefully. You know, we're talking about interfering with private contracts. Now they're almost monopolistic contracts. But my question is, you know, how is it? I mean, and I'll ask you this, Paul. How is it that monopolies ever exist? I mean, the only way monopolies ever exist is because of government interference.
Right.
And so, like, the better long-term solution would be to go in and say, where are we screwing things up as a government? Now, the problem in healthcare, most of it is federal. But let's say on the state level, how are we doing it to make this problem worse so PBMs can have that type of control over the pharmacists? And then let's try to work in that route long term. And so that type of thing, literally to find the solution is probably like a 5-year, 10-year plan to actually get a long-term solution. Now, the question is, I'm not ready for my folks to go out of business, you know, between now and then. So how do we find that solution to help them during that time? Yeah. But I hate to put in a new the definition of eternal life as a new government program. Well, you know, give them the opportunity to regulate and create a new. I mean, I've tried to get rid of license. I know it's a booger. I mean, it's hard to do.
Yeah, well, and I know you have. My comment on that is we're in the middle of a socialistic healthcare system, and now as a conservative, I am now asking for regulation as a conservative because the government brought us to this point, as you brought up. They've brought us here in the first place, and the big issue here for me is that when you take taxpayer dollars to pay for these Arkansas Works plans and these Blue Cross policies, and then the Blue Cross has the deal with CVS Caremark. Now you have pharmacist taxpayer dollars going to a system that is putting them out of business, and that is, I think, is why this has risen to a boiling point.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, and so I agree 100% with all that, but I think you would also agree, like, if we're going down this path, it ought to be something that we're very deliberative in how we do it. You know,
right, but that's to my point. Very deliberative, but let's do it in an open session. Let's not try. Let's actually let you guys legislate, and instead of saying, well, we need to decide the language before we even call the session, and let's go ahead and get a predetermined result so that it's compact and short. I guess I want you guys to be able to have the up or down votes on amendments, and I want you guys to be able to do all that without having to. I mean, it's one thing to have a framework, but I don't like these negotiations before you guys actually have the power to do something, to vote and legislate.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I get that, and I would say that if we were in a general session right now, it would be easy to be able to probably do a lot of that. Although, I mean, you and I both know that most of the work that's done up here is done before you ever get to committee meetings. Is done before you ever get to the floor, and that's not something new. I mean, that the founders would have envisioned it working like that. I mean, I don't think that's a bad deal. I just would say that, you know, and there'll be plenty of time for vigorous debate. I would assume, even when we get to the committees and the floor. But if you can create something that has much more broad support and that is well thought through, and then we still try to have some fidelity at least to free market principles and ideas, and with a vision that maybe long-term solution is going to it's not going to mean a new government program and regulatory authority that will last forever. I mean, those are the things I'd like to. I mean, frankly, my opinion about this whole thing is that we pay billions of dollars out in healthcare in Arkansas. We ought to do with it through contract and not, you know. So how we contract with Blue Cross Blue Shield, how we contract through direct pay, through Medicaid, you know, we should do that in a way that we guarantee that the pharmacists are treated well. It wouldn't fix all the problems, but at least it would be something that the state can do without creating new regulation. But anyway, that's, you know, I think that's probably a solution that, like, me and almost nobody else is looking at, and so it's probably not going to happen. But the point is that, you know, I really think that we need to be careful about how we do this, and that, if we can find a long-term solution that doesn't make it where it doesn't grow government, doesn't entrench a new government program, that's great. If not, then we need to be looking at temporary solutions that later on we can address some of those things.
We're talking with State Representative Bob Ballinger. Now let's talk about your race, because and we now have a primary between you and Brian King. This is what a lot of people thought was going to happen, but I think a lot of people had counted out Brian jumping in the race.
I mean,
go ahead.
Senator King for a long time has indicated that he didn't want to run for re-election. The last session he wasn't in Little Rock a whole lot. I think that his voting record shows he votes 25% of the time this last session. And he has indicated that and I don't blame him. He's been down here for 12 years. He's, has been, feels like that he is kind of getting beat up all the time. I mean, it seemed like it would have been an appropriate time for him to go back and focus on the farm and his home and family and let things kind of go. And that's sort of what the direction looked like was going to happen. But, it kind of was getting, apparent that Senator King wasn't quite ready to go home yet. So I kind of anticipated there's a good chance he was going to file.
Well, so you called him in the Gazette an angry man who can't work with other lawmakers. That's not a misquote, right? You believe?
No, that's. It's a factual quote. I mean, the truth is, I also said in the Gazette that he has accomplished a lot of stuff down here. That he's done some good things. He's been a legislator in the past that I could admire. But it's just like a lot of things in people's lives. They get to the point where they've hit their head against the wall so many times that they're just no longer able to really function and think. And that's where Senator King has gotten, is that, I pity him for being in a position that he is, and there but the grace of God go I. I hope that I know when it's time to go home, and that I don't get into my 11th year and get to the point where I'm no longer effective, and I've been so mean and so mad to so many people that they won't even people who are my friends are like, hey, what's going on? Why are you doing that? And so
hang on.
I hope
but you
that
just
I
said
go
he can no
home
longer. You just said he can no longer function and think. I mean, I would dispute that. I mean, I think he's able to think, and I think he makes a lot of great points that it really kind of exposes, the flaws of government a lot of times.
Let me say this: that okay, so let me say this: you are exactly right that he does make a lot of great points, and he goes down and he speaks to those great points. But nobody's listening because they've already had, 3 years ago, he poked his finger in one of their eyes. And then 2 months ago, he poked his finger in the other eye. And so they're not listening to him at all. I'm not saying he's not a very intelligent man, because he is. There's no question about his level of intellect. What it is, you get so, and you and I have both done it, we're both men, where we get so mad in a situation, we're no longer able to really function and rationally. All of a sudden, things that maybe aren't so, but it looks like it's so, and it feels like it's so you believe it to be so. And that's where Senator King is that, there's so many times he's come up to me and he said, you did this. Like, I know I didn't do that, but in his mind, he's worked it. He's not lying. He really believes it. But he's worked it up to the point where he totally believes this absolutely unfactual thing to be true. And that's kind of where he's at. And
I think if you're going to accuse him of that, I can name a ton of lawmakers who do the exact same thing, who think that they know something to be true when in fact it is not true. We all we're human beings, so we all do it to some extent. The question is whether or not if we're talking about people who are just flat up liars, they're also not effective down here because people know they're flat out liars. So all these other things, there are a lot of things that can make you not effective and make it where people don't want to work with you. And in his level of frustration that's worked to anger, that's worked to the point where he's not rational about how he interacts and works with people. Yeah, I think a good example of this, right? So the governor comes to Carroll County, has a Lincoln Day dinner, and he comes in, and the Senator King is there. And the governor says something, everyone stands up and applauds. Senator King stands up, this is about a year, stands up and applauds, gives a standing ovation to the governor. Well, why do you do that? Well, I know how much Senator King is upset as governor, and
even thinks extremely lowly of the governor, but he did that because the quorum required it. He did that because in that environment it would have been objectionable for him not to do that. And then the governor a few months ago comes to Green Forest and he gets 2 standing ovations there. Well, Senator King stands up and gives standing why? Because the quorum requires it. Because anything else would have been out of place. It would not have achieved the goals, whatever. And so both of those situations, it was the right thing. In spite of how he feels about the governor, it was the right thing to do. That same kind of decorum, I wish he would have that control here. And if he would, the truth is he was not going to run for re-election, so I probably would have ran anyway. But if he wanted to continue to have that, I would have never ran for re-election.
You point out that Brian King is not happy with the governor, and he makes that well known. Are you happy with the governor? What do you think of the governor, Bob?
It depends. What are you talking about? So there's sometimes I'm really happy with the governor. There's sometimes I'm really disappointed with the governor. But that's kind of the way the government's supposed to work, right? It's supposed to be sort of ambitions, checking ambitions, and different ideas coming to the table. And I want to bring my constitutional limited government philosophy up here, and I want to push back on anything that's not like that. And hopefully we come to some sort of happy medium in the middle. What I want is I want to be the legislator like Nelda speaks, right? I want to be the legislator like Ronald Reagan was. I want to be the happy warrior who comes up here and doesn't give in on my convictions, conservative convictions, limited government, small L libertarian, ideas. But I also want to be somebody that is not objectionable. I mean, there are several things that the Senator King has done, and he is, like I said, he's not a stupid person. I think in his core, he is a limited government conservative. Now, I don't think everything he does is that, but people would say the same thing about me.
Bob, we've got to take a break. Yeah. We're out of time, but hey, let's do this again, and we can get into more. We can get into some issues, and we'll talk about current events as well as the differences between you and Brian and that sort of thing. So we can certainly do this again.
Anytime.
Okay.
I'd be happy to come on.
All right, thanks. State Representative Bob Ballinger, everybody. We got to take a break. Back in just a moment.